Now, Charlie lived up in the near Traverse City, East Jordan area. My grandfather lived in Chicago, and Uncle Howard, his oldest son and his first wife, and he died or was born in Chicago. Uncle Adrian was born there on the home farm because that's when William C. died, and Ed came back to take over the farm. And that's when they built the cottage down in the orchard for Cordelia to live. And he lived in the home. And his wife died of appendicitis. She was sick, and as I understand it, he was taking her to Ann Arbor to the hospital when she died on the train, as I understand it. And then he later married my grandmother, Blanche Jones. And then they had 4 children. Dad and Don and Lucille and Glenn, or Bud, was the youngest one. So they had 4 children. My grandfather, Ed, had cancer. And he died of cancer, but the Joneses were a different family. They lived up on the river. The old man's name was Thomas Jefferson Jones. They called him Jeff, little guy. Dad told a story that he and Uncle Don were gonna plant some beans. And so they were up at Grandpa Jones's house. And he sold them some bean seed. And so they brought it home. Grandpa looked at it and said, "Hey, that's molded and won't grow." Put the boys right back in the buggy, went right back, made old Jeff give them their money back, made him take the beans back.
So that was his own
grandchildren.
Grandpa.
Yeah, it was his grandchildren.
Oh my gosh.
He would get mad, go out and sit on the wood pile and sulk. The old man would. I don't remember Grandma Lucy, his wife, but I remember old Jeff. He lived there with Reed and Sadie, and yeah, one of Foss's stories. He was up there with them, and they were making moonshine, and the still was in the granary, and they were running a batch off. And old Foss looked out through a crack in the granary, and he said, "Oh my God, a car just drove in. It's the sheriff." He said, "We got to get the hell out of here." And old Jeff said, "Oh, hell, Foss. He's just coming to get his weekly supply." Old Foss told a story that he and Reed somehow got some money. And they went into Mount Pleasant and bought a new bicycle, the 2 of them. They didn't have money enough for each to buy a bicycle. The 2 of them pooled their money and bought a bicycle. And they brought it home. So they were riding it around, and so they put a little block of wood down and put a board on it. And they'd ride up the board and jump it off the end. And so they took turns doing that, and they kept getting the board higher and higher. And by afternoon, they had the board on top of the rail fence, and they were riding the bicycle up and jumping it off the rail fence, broke the frame right in 2. The first day they had, old Foss laughed about that. It's my understanding that Grandpa Grover was dating Grandma while she was working for Grandpa Decker. He hired Grandma as a hired gal to take care of Howard and Adrian and do the housework and stuff. And when she married Edward, Grandpa took off Everett, and he worked. He told me he worked on a steamboat on the Mississippi River for a while, and then he went west, and he worked for a while as a blacksmith on a ranch, and he had a blacksmith shop in that old shop down there. And then he drifted back and wound up north, down at Pompeii, south of Ithaca. Had a little farm there, and he worked at one time for Consumers Power, and he worked for one time as a lineman with the telegraph company when they were building the telegraph line. And the first time that they came to our house, it had to be in 1940 because we were living across from the Stone House. And Ed and Lucille had just gotten married and had lived in the Grandma's house. All the furniture and stuff was in there because when she went down to, she married Everett and got married, they lived down in Pompeii for a few years, 3 or 4 years, and then they sold that farm and he moved up here on this one.
You said Grandma Townsend wasn't the most grandma-ish. She wasn't that nice. Because she lived across the road from you guys.
Well, she lived there some of the time with Grandma, my grandma. But Grandma Townsend looked like an Indian. She was old, and Marguerite and my mother always wore big hats in the summer, until later years, and Marguerite didn't, because they would turn so damn dark colored in the sun, they would just get black. And they were always trying to hide the fact. Uncle Mac was going around trying to find out what tribe he was from. Uncle Mac would catch a toad, and he'd give it to us guys and say, take that and give it to Grandma Townsend. She really likes toads. We'd take the damn thing in, and she'd be madder than hell, you know, run us out of the house. Old Mac would laugh, and yeah,
And Grandma Vera, then, your mom's mom, she was a very nice lady.
Yes, she was. She was very, very nice. And she was she was very sharp and modern. She was one of the first women that wore overalls. At the beginning of World War II, it became fashionable for women to wear overalls, and she wore them on the farm. You betcha. When Mac went in the Army, she went to Kalamazoo. Marguerite and Vernon were living in Kalamazoo. And she lived in Kalamazoo and did domestic work. But then she come back and worked in the kitchen at Central Michigan. And she would come home and she was good friends with the college girls that worked in the kitchen. So they told her everything that was going on at the university. There was a college then. She'd come home and tell my mother, and my mother would be just horrified at some of the things, you know, that she'd tell them.